What is happening, everybody? It is Trey here. I'm joined again today by my dad, Sean, and today on Reactions to the Classics, we're going to be taking a look at John Lennon's debut solo record, John Lennon / the Plastic Ono Band. First time we've ever heard this record. We just wrapped up all the Beatles reviews, which you can check out down below. And if this is your first time checking us out at the channel, we really appreciate it, y'all. Here at Reactions to the Classics, we take a look back at some of the most classic records of all time and do a detailed track-by-track review of them. And just like today, it's usually the first time we've heard the record. So if that sounds like something interesting to you, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button. And if you'd like to link up with us more, we have links to our Facebook and Patreon down below. But all that to say, let's get into the quick facts.
Well, Trey, this is the debut solo album for John Lennon, released in December of 1970. This album was recorded simultaneously with Yoko Ono / the Plastic Ono Band. They used all the same musicians. They have almost the same cover art. Now, they had asked Phil Spector to co-produce this thing, who did Let It Be with the Beatles. And Phil did a little bit of it, but actually he was hardly ever available. So Yoko and John both produced this and did most of the mixing. Spector did a little bit of that, 3 days worth at the end. It's number 23 on the Rolling Stones top 500 albums of all time, reached number 8 in the UK, number 6 in the US. The backstory of this album is following the breakup of the Beatles officially in April 1970. John and Yoko undertook primal therapy, also known as scream therapy, from a guy named Arthur Janoff. And they were with Arthur for 3 weeks in London. Then Arthur had to go back to LA. So John and Yoko went with him for 4 months in LA to continue this therapy. And the way this therapy works is you're trying to bring back repressed childhood traumas, and that's supposedly getting healing. John's visa expired before he was able to get done with this training, but he took all of those feelings and things he was going through, and he used it to write the lyrics of these songs, and they're going to come out as this thing unfolds.
Yeah, well, much of the lyrical content in this record deals with psychological trauma, child-parent relationships, stuff that came out through this primal therapy. It also influenced the musical direction because a lot of the backing and instrumentation in this record is sparse and lighter than contrast with the harsher, more impactful, brutal lyrics. So there's an interesting dichotomy there, and a lot of it stems from this primal therapy, and we see that in the opening track of Mother. And from the jump, this is going to be a little unique album because it starts with funeral bells tolling multiple times, and then we just go in to just kind of some nice chilled out music, but that's contrasted with John's harsh lyrics saying, "Mama, don't go, Daddy, come home." All the way towards the end of the song, he just starts belting those lyrics out. I really dug this track. I thought it set the tone for this album and what we were in store for. Just that rawness that Lennon showed really resonated.
Yeah, there's no playing around with this song. This song is an incredibly deeply personal song, which makes it different for John than a lot of his Beatles work. There were some personal things, but this album in particular is just amazing how he pours his soul out. He wrote it for his dad, Alf, who left him as an infant, didn't see him again until he was 20, and then his mom, Julia, who, when his parents got divorced, he didn't really live with her either. He did reconcile with her towards the end, but she was killed when he was 17 in a car accident with an off-duty cop. So this song is one of the highlights on the album for me, not just for the lyrical content. I think his voice sounds tremendous. Lennon may be my favorite vocalist of all time, and it's on display here. That brings us to Hold On. The song's only 1 minute 52 seconds, but it took him 32 takes to come upon this arrangement. He was just playing around with it. The theme basically is emotional fragility, as lyrics state that when you're alone in the world, you just have to, quote, hold on. So Lennon tries to assure himself that he and Yoko have the strength to overcome their challenges, and if he holds on, it's going to be all right, and we're going to win the fight.
And this expands towards the end of the track, talking about the whole world, that if we would just all be one and be at peace with each other, we'll be able to hold on. A solid track. I thought it was a nice way for the listener to breathe a little bit after Mother, and for that reason I dug it. The upbeat style was something that made it stand out. Great guitar work and bass work in here as well. And then that'll take us to track 3. I Found Out. We start to see the inner workings of John's mind here. He takes shots at everything from religion to drugs to his own parents. There's a line in there that kind of harkens back, reminds the listener of Mother, saying that, you know, his parents didn't want him, that they made him a star, just kind of from the trauma there that propelled him to stardom. He started off slower and just kind of more calm, and then midway through the song, the music starts to go in, and his voice does too, a little bit more powerful.
Yeah, and with that, I think it's more influenced by blues than any other song on this album. I enjoyed it. The lyrics on this album bother me to some extent in certain places because I am a Christian, and so I think John was badly misguided in the way he looked at things, but I see why he was so jaded. He had a difficult time growing up, to say the least. And then, of course, he's coming off the Lads from Liverpool's breakup, which was obviously incredibly difficult. He did life with those guys for over a decade. For me, the vocal performance was excellent on this one, which takes us to Working Class Hero. This is political. It's kind of a social, political commentary on the lower class or the working class trying to be processed up into the middle class. Working for the Man kind of brings a little Pink Floyd stuff in it for me, just the lyrical content. Obviously, where John grew up, he grew up with the working class, so now he's went from working class almost to upper class. So it's kind of a weird transition for him, but he's talking to the working class, knowing that they're out there doing the work.
Yeah, I think this is my favorite track on the record. He has that refrain, "A working class hero is something to be." It's just him and that acoustic guitar.
Yes.
Again, showing the sparse arrangement on this record. Very thought-provoking lyrics here. You know, he talks about they hurt you at home, hit you at school. You know, you go 20 years and then they expect you to find a career. You know, just a bunch of one-liners in there that got me thinking. And for that reason, it was pretty raw too. A couple F-bombs here and
here. There was a couple F-bombs in there. It's kind of weird to hear from an album from '70.
Yeah, so that probably shocked some people back in the day too, just along with the lyrical content in there. So big hit for me, as well as this next track, Isolation. Here he's talking about how even though him and Yoko are at the top of the game, top of society, that they still have those feelings of isolation,
self-doubt. And I think it's an isolated life, because I think a lot of us, you know, when you grow up, you think if you have a lot of money or you have this job or that's going to solve all your problems. And he found out there's very few people in the world who are more famous than him at the time this thing was written, has fame, has fortune, and it wasn't enough. They still have self-doubt. They still go through all the stuff that we go through. So for me, he has a very raw, like Mother, a very raw look inside of John, which, as I already mentioned earlier, is very rare. So for me, this is one of the standout tracks on the album.
Then we start the B-side with Remember. This was influenced by the Primal Therapy yet again. The lyrics reflect things typically remembered in therapy. The memories John describes here are unpleasant ones: conflict with family, authority.
And this was recorded on his 30th birthday, and was recorded on the last day he ever saw his father. He invited him to lunch, and he had a Primal Therapy kind of flashback on Alf, his father, and Alf later reflected how he was scared and worried, and they never saw each other again. And I don't know if it's because he didn't complete the therapy, or the therapy is highly controversial because it brings these things to the surface, and sometimes you don't know how to deal with them. But for me, it was a really good song. Once again, just like I said on the last song, he's out there with his soul and how he feels about things.
Oh yeah, and the piano riff here was fantastic. Reminded me a little bit of Hey Bulldog.
Agreed.
So the piano work here is not something you normally associate with Lennon. It's more with, you know, McCartney back in the Beatles days. So the piano throughout here was interesting little twist. And then that takes us into Love. This is a more kind of optimistic, more upbeat type of track. For me, it was more forgettable than the rest of the record here. Nothing too much to say about it. He had a good vocal performance though.
Yeah, Spector's playing the piano on this one, so I guess he was around the studio when they were recording this one, obviously. John actually loved this song off the album, was kind of pushing for it to be the single over Mother, but he went ahead and gave in to Spector and the label. Yeah, for me, it's a fine song. I think it's John, you know, it's a lot of the theme of this time over the last few Beatles albums too, is written to Yoko. And yeah, for me, it's good. I don't think it's forgettable, but it's not a standout either compared to some of these other tracks.
Then that takes us into the longest track on this record, Well, Well, Well. Here, the lyrics depict John hanging out with Yoko, just doing mundane things in life, such as eating a meal, going out for a walk, talking about women's liberation and revolution. So, I mean, I know you'll get into this, but kind of reminded me at the end of Mother. He just screams here throughout the song, wow, wow, wow. Very powerful performance.
Kind of reminded me of Twist and Shout off the Beatles debut album, Please Please. He's just, I mean, he is just screaming these things. So he goes from being tender on the song to being ferocious. And as you mentioned, it just describes their uneasiness in life of doing those mundane things. So once again, as previously in the album, it's just showing you that they're real people and they struggle as well. Now we come up to Look at Me. He actually wrote this during the time that they were in India when they were writing the White Album stuff, like Dear Prudence and Julia. And
it sounds a lot like Julia.
Gun, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I agree. And he actually used the finger-picking style that he learned from Donovan while they were in India in 1968. So yeah, for me, this sounds a lot like a White Album song. I love that album. So this track is one of the best on here.
Yeah, it's very solid, and I think the lyrics just kind of detail what Lennon was really facing. And he says, who am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be? After this Beatles run, obviously a lot of confusion probably on his part about where to turn next, what to do next, and I think that's reflected very well in this track.
Yeah, I think when you're in your 20s and you know you've peaked at the absolute pinnacle that you could get in your career, that has to be fulfilling, but it also has to be scary, because where do you go from here? Because no matter what you do, it's not going to be good enough. And I think a lot of that comes out in this album as well.
Then track 10 takes us to God. This was controversial upon its release for the anti-religious themes in here. He starts off the song saying that God is a concept by which we measure our pain, and then he just starts to detail stuff that he doesn't believe in. He doesn't believe in magic, I Ching, the Bible, Hitler, Jesus, Kennedy, Elvis, Zimmerman, and then he really twisted in there at the end saying he doesn't believe in the Beatles, but he believes in him and Yoko. This song it's interesting. One of the reasons I like music so much is to get the worldview and the point of view from people who have beliefs and thoughts that are different than mine. Me and Lennon have a vastly different worldview when it comes to a bunch of different topics, and especially on God. But this song was interesting just because it really detailed what his thoughts were on religion and a bunch of other topics on the time. And though I don't obviously fully agree with it, I still respect the fact that, hey, he's out there, he's willing to be unabashed with his beliefs. Just interesting to hear just some of that angst within him just brought out in this track.
And the last part of this song, John kind of discusses his Beatles breakup. They were basically, I mentioned earlier, they were his family for all the 60s until Yoko came along, and he said, I'm not the walrus, I'm not the dream weaver, I'm just John. John was looking for fulfillment and answers within himself, and that's a slippery slope, and you're never going to find contentment there. And I share, obviously, your views about spirituality and God, but I'm with you too. John was out there on this album like none other. He was not afraid to put out there what he thought, even calling out Bob Dylan. That's the Zimmerman. I mean, he's just a laundry list. I guess he was holding it in for a long time. You had to be a little PC when you're in the Beatles. They let it out a little bit, but he's letting it all out here. So for me, it's a very well constructed song. It is a standout on here, which takes us to the last track, My Mummy's Dead. This thing's only 49 seconds long. It's kind of to the rhythm of the nursery rhyme Three Blind Mice. And man, it's heartbreaking, honestly. You start out with Mother, and then you come to this song.
Yeah, and his voice seems to have some vocal effect on it, like he's speaking through something, which just adds to almost the eeriness and sadness to the track. So I think it was a fitting way to end the record, though, just dealing with these heavy themes that we have been dealing with. And that'll take us to our favorite tracks. For me, the A-side I thought was really strong. Working Class Hero, Mother, I Found Out, Isolation, those are some that are going to be at the top for me.
I'm going to echo that. All of those for me as well. I think the A-side is better than the B-side. Although the B-side's good. And that takes us to our grade. What do you rate this overall?
Yeah, for me, I thought this was a great album. I appreciated the rawness, as I've mentioned many times. I think that it might be off-putting for some, just how up front and how his heart is on his sleeve. Some people might, cringe at that, while others will really relate to that and his openness of it. But for me, I'm going to settle at a nice 8.75 out of 10 on this.
We have not discussed this at all. It's exactly where I'm at, 8.75. It's a really good album. It's really interesting for me after going on this whole Beatles journey to see John lay it out there in a different way lyrically when he doesn't have any other parameters, when the other three aren't there. It worked for me in a big time way.
Absolutely, and let us know what you think of this record down below, your favorite track. We will be coming back with Imagine. I know the title track of that, of course, but don't know anything else.
That's it, me too.
So looking forward to that. Thanks, Dad, as always, for the research. And like I said earlier, y'all be sure to hit the big red subscribe button if you enjoyed this video. And we upload twice a week, variety of genre, so there will be something for everybody. And until next time, y'all, thank you so much for watching. Happy listening, my friends, and we will see you next time.